You think your orchid is tough? Wait till you meet Oncidium sphacelatum. This golden giant will thrive in areas that most other orchids will just give up. From sizzling sun to those chilly evenings, those near freezing temperatures that you may get at night. This guy is still going to grow well and produce masses of blooms. In this video, we'll dive into the secrets behind Oncidium sphacelatum, one of the most resilient, sun-loving orchids you could ever grow. We'll show you how to keep it thriving year after year with massive flower sprays, even if your weather does throw a few cold surprises at it. We'll break down everything from you to light and watering, feeding and repotting, and temperature tolerance, so that you can grow this powerhouse with confidence. By the end of this video, you'll know exactly how to turn your Oncidium sphacelatum into a blooming machine by understanding the right timing, the right feeding strategy, and how to use those temperature shifts to your advantage. You'll walk away ready to grow bigger bulbs, stronger roots, and more spectacular flower spikes than ever before. At the Nature Company, we try and demystify the science behind orchid growing so you're not left frustrated and confused. Let's get ready to grow these dancing ladies. We'll keep temperature and repotting until the end because those are some of the most important to ensure proper flowering of your plant, and that way they're going to be fresh in your mind by the time you've finished watching. Let's start off with their light requirements. These guys are actually quite forgiving with how much light they need. They can take anything from those mild light conditions that you might give on the high range of your Phalaenopsis, all the way through those bright light conditions that your Cattleya need, to even some of those even brighter light conditions that something like your Papilionanthus might want. Because these guys can grow in the full, glaring, blazing sun. So they can be quite forgiving in that way while still producing their blooms. There is going to be some difference in the blooming that you get as your light varies. With some of the plants, depending on their genetic makeup, as they have quite a broad range where they naturally come from, all the way from Mexico down through to Peru. They can accept these different light conditions, but you also get different lengths of flower spikes. The flower spikes can be up to 1 meter long with up to 200 flowers on each flower spike. And with some of them, depending on the sun values that you give them, can affect how many flowers or how long that flowering spike can get. Sometimes with some of them, the more sun you give them, if you're putting them out in the full sun, your flower spike can get just slightly shorter, but often you'll land up with a more compact flowering spike. You might still land up with the same number of blooms, but on a slightly shorter flower spike than you would perhaps if it was in a slightly shadier condition where your flower spike might grow a bit longer and the flowers would be a little bit spread out. But that's only with some of them, depending on their genetic makeup, like I said. And with these having such a broad spectrum of light that they can grow in or become accustomed to, means you can get flowers from them in so many different conditions, even indoors, ensuring that you are still giving them enough light to get that flowering. The light conditions are quite easy to tell sometimes. If your leaves start becoming that dark emerald green, you know it's probably a little bit too dark for them. Anything from a light green to this almost sickly yellow is ideal for flowering. Often the more yellow it is, the more flower spikes you may get. But then, as I said, with some of them, you may find those flower spikes being slightly shorter, but you may get a fuller bunch of flowers. If you start seeing a little bit of reddening on your plant, perhaps you're giving it a little bit too much sun, perhaps they're heating up too far and your leaf is about to burn. So if you start seeing that reddishness to it, then it's time to just perhaps give it a little bit of midday shade. Because although these do like lots and lots of sun, sometimes depending on your humidity levels and the amount of air movement you've got, they can burn in that midday sun depending on how hot you are. So if you can, give them a little bit of shade during the midday while still allowing that morning and even that afternoon sun to come blaring in at them. If you're growing them indoors, put them in an east-facing window so that they can get that full morning sun through the window, and then perhaps some shade afterwards. They probably won't need that net curtaining that you might need for something like your Phalaenopsis. While we're talking about light, let's conjoin that with your watering, or the amount of water that your plant gets. Because, as I said, the more sun it gets, the more humidity it's going to need to be able to sort of almost reflect that heat off its leaves, or to be able to reduce the temperature of the leaves itself so that they don't burn in that full sun. And the more sun it's going to be getting, generally, the faster it's going to dry out, so the more watering it's going to need. These guys like to be kept on the moist side most of the time. They don't like to dry out too much. They've got these rather thin pseudobulbs that can wrinkle up quite quickly. And if you have wrinkled pseudobulbs, they generally don't like to flower terribly much. So you'd like to keep those pseudobulbs nice and plump. But remember, with these fine roots like this, keeping them too wet is going to rot these roots incredibly quickly. So it's going to be a good balance between water and aeration. So depending on your climate and the media you're keeping them in is going to depend on how often you're keeping them watered, because don't let them dry out completely. So these guys are going to want more water than what your Cattleyas might want. But remember, because they do build up such a big clump, they need lots of air movement through them all the time, because the air can get stagnant in between them if you are growing larger plants. So you're going to want to make sure that you have a nice gentle breeze blowing through to keep that air movement, so that any excess water can be evaporated out, and we're helping avoid any of that rot or that fungal problems that you may have. That's also how to avoid the fungal problems on the leaves, is by ensuring you have good air movement. These are slightly susceptible to some of those fungal problems, like Cercospora especially, and Ganadia and other fungal problems like that. If you're unsure what fungus is attacking your plant, check out that Buy Me a Coffee link in the description box below. There is a lot of fungal related articles that Ed has posted up in that, and you can check those out there. We also have an excellent video describing all the different fungal problems that may happen to your orchids, with pictures and discussions on how to treat them. You can check that in the description box below. We'll put the link to that video there too. So air movement and watering and sun, now that we've done all of those, what about feeding? These guys are quite vigorous growers. So during the growing season, they actually sort of heavy feeders in a way, perhaps not quite as heavy as what your Vanda might be, but you can probably feed them as frequently. So using that weekly that we talk about all the time, you take the recommended dose on your fertilizer label and you divide that by a half or a quarter even, and then feed that weekly to your plant. That way it's going to be constantly getting the food it needs to keep growing and be healthy. Only the time that you're going to slowly stop feeding it is when it gets towards winter. Also, I forgot to mention, during winter and watering, you can reduce your watering in winter if your plant starts to go dormant. These plants don't necessarily go completely dormant, they just slow down their growth as the temperature drops. So you need to reduce your watering at that point, and at that point, you're going to be reducing your feeding too. So you're only going to want to be feeding perhaps once a month if your plant has really slowed down or seems to have stopped growing, but it hasn't stopped growing, it's just really slowed down. And we'll get onto how temperature is going to affect that just now too. These beauties generally flower in sort of spring through to the early summer period, and this is when you need to start giving them heavier food, is just after they're flowering, because that's when all the new growths start happening. So as spring comes around, you start feeding. Some people like to feed those bloom boosters at that period, but I generally just use an organic food right the way through. We rotate our organic feeds to ensure that our plants get all the required nutrients. But if you're using those chemical feeds and you like to use bloom boosters, then you use those bloom boosters just as winter is finished and spring is starting, so that these guys can set their blooms the way you like them. And during these different seasons of the year, generally our humidities change around our plant. And the humidities for these guys aren't that important either, because they can accept anything from about 50% to 70% humidity is ideal for them. That 50% can be easily accomplished in a household environment indoors, so that's what makes them easy to grow just about anywhere, whether you grow them indoors or whether you grow them out in your garden at home. So that 50 to 70% just makes them easy orchids. But again, just remember with these humidity levels, remember the hotter it is, the more humidity they need so that the plants don't desiccate too quickly. Remember, these roots are quite fine, so also not only are they prone to rot, they're also prone to drying out quickly. And once your roots dried out, it's basically dead, so it has to then produce new roots again. So try not to let those roots dry out. Keep those humidity levels at a decent level for it, and you shouldn't have any problems. Now let's get to those temperature fluctuations and how this plant can tolerate them, and how we can use those to our advantage as well to ensure that we get these huge big masses of flowers. This guy, we've only got 11 flower spikes coming off it at the moment. They're only just really starting. The buds are just starting to open. They haven't opened up fully, so we don't have that full big mass boom of color yet. But this is a poor display for this plant. Generally, I can have anything from 18 to 25 flower spikes on this specific plant, but we've just ignored this for a little bit too long now. We should have repotted this earlier and kept it in good nick. Here I've left it too long. The media is all sunken, it's decomposed, and again, with these fine roots, they don't like that decomposed media, which is going to hold too much moisture. It's not going to allow for air movement, and that's what's going to reduce the amount of flowering that's going to happen. Because I probably don't have too much root volume in this pot to actually support much more bloom volume than what is here at the moment. Also, these new bulbs aren't quite as big and full and plump as what they could be if I had repotted them earlier, giving them that fresh media to allow for the air movement, to allow for the absorption of those nutrients. So this is one of the reasons that timing your repotting is always going to be important. To get the most out of the flowering of these guys, you really have to repot them almost immediately after flowering. Your new growth might not have started yet, or the new root growth might not have started yet, but you may start seeing little shoots coming out around the sides of your pseudobulbs. But this is one of the best times, because you can get in, pull your plant apart quite viciously if need be, remove a lot of that old root volume that's no longer needed, because those back pseudobulbs, a lot of them will be finished and not viable any longer. And you can just remove all of that dead weight off out of the plant to allow for air movement back in, and then allow it to root in as those new growths set. So do that after flowering. If you do it before flowering, often most of the flowers will abort and some of those flower spikes just may not grow. So just wait till the flowering's done. The other time you could do is wait for that flowering to be done, see those new pseudobulbs starting to grow, and wait for those new roots to be about 1 centimeter or 2 long, and then repot. And that way your plant is already in that active growth phase, its roots are looking for somewhere, so then it's going to be a good time to repot them. But don't repot it directly into the media. Try and lift it out of those new roots, just out of the media, just so that they're just above the media, and that will help force them to grow in deep, allow for that air movement around the roots, so you're not going to get any rotting at those pseudobulbs, and then you'll land up with probably the best results. So just pot it those roots just above the media so that they can then grow themselves in. And if you've taken big enough pieces off your plant will then flower for you in the next season without a problem. Of course, if you've removed it to possibly only 2 or 3 pseudobulbs, you may have to wait for the following season for the flowering to begin again. But remember, with these guys, their growth can be quite vigorous. You can get 2 shoots off each pseudobulb, 1 off each side, and that can multiply your plant up quite quickly. So don't put it in too small a pot. Also because you're going to land up with too much weight on your pot and it will start falling over. We'll also link that video to the repotting of our Oncidium sphacelatum in the description box down below, just so that you know how to repot your plant and treat it if you do have any fungus on it. And now the all-important temperatures. These guys are also very forgiving in their temperature ranges that they can grow in. Where a lot of other orchids may struggle, these guys will thrive. They can take daytime temperatures. The most comfortable temperatures to them really are between 24 and 30 degrees Celsius. This is around 75 to 86 degrees Fahrenheit, but they can take temperatures quite a bit higher too. We can get daytime temperatures here occasionally up to around 40 or 45 degrees Celsius, but notice that is very occasionally. If they are out in the full sun during the midday, you might get a little bit of burn on the leaf. But if they have been accustomed to generally your warm temperatures out in the full sun, they can withstand that 40 degrees without a problem. The 45 starts becoming problematic. We do get little black marks. But with a little bit of shade and your heat, it should still be fine. And your nighttime temperatures, anything from 15 to 18 degrees, which is 59 to 65 degrees Fahrenheit. These guys, that's their ideal range, if you have that, which most people don't. These guys can take evening temperatures all the way down to 0, to 32 degrees Fahrenheit. They will still survive as long as your daytime temperatures are bumped straight back up again and they're not frosted. They'll sometimes accept a very light frosting without causing damage, but it's probably better to keep them away from that frost altogether. So they can go down to temperatures of, shall we say, 1 degree, just to be sure that we avoid that frost. But when we start getting to those low temperatures, there's going to be some important factors that you need to take into consideration. We need to have our plants be dry. If they are moist or wet in these conditions, you're going to have big problems with fungal attacks, and especially if it's going down to low degrees, almost 0, then that's when you're going to land up with that frost, freezing that water and just killing your plant really. It's going to burn those roots by that water freezing in your plant. So if you are getting those cooler temperatures like that, keep your plant on the drier side. Water it during the day, make sure there's lots of air movement around it so that it can then dry out by the evening if you've got cool temperatures at night. So if you're watering in winter, try and keep your watering to a minimum if you are cool. Only if you start seeing that slight wrinkling of your pseudobulbs should you then give them a light watering occasionally, just to stop any further wrinkling. We don't want to be keeping them moist like we do keep them in spring and summer. We're going to keep them on the drier side. Of course, as your temperatures are rising, or if you don't get down to temperatures that cold, then you can keep your plant a little bit more moist through that period, because that moisture is going to dry up during the day and not going to cause a problem in those cooler evening night temperatures. And what is it that's so important about these cooler nighttime temperatures, or the temperature shifts and your orchid flowering? As your plant heads through winter, they actually appreciate a higher drop in your diurnal temperatures. That's your temperature difference between your day and night. So the more temperature variation you can give them during that period often means the better flowering you can get out of them. So if you can give them anywhere from a 10-15 degree temperature variation between your day and night, this is going to be absolutely ideal for them to get their maximum flowering. So the only real things that are going to stop this guy from flowering is if your temperatures are too constant the whole year through, day and night, and also if it is in too much shade. Those are going to be your two major problems when it comes to non-blooming of your orchids. So we can see how easy they can be to bloom. That's not to, of course, to forget that repotting time, as long as you're repotting at the right time and repotting large enough pieces, and you're not rotting off all the roots of your plant, obviously. So these guys are really some of the toughest, hardiest, easiest to bloom orchids, something I think everyone should have in their collection. Doesn't matter whether you're growing outdoors or indoors, these are always such a joy to own. And thank you for watching. If you found any of this information helpful, please hit that like button, hit that subscribe button, and that notification bell, bing bong, to be notified of all our upcoming content so you don't miss out on a thing. Help us grow as we help your orchids grow.